Thank you. I'm Sham. I work as a consumer engagement officer for Australia and New Zealand Dialysis and Transplant Registry, which is ANSTADA, based in level 4. And I also lead the SAHMRI Consumer Engagement Community of Practice, where we have more than 50 members from different organizations, and we do conduct monthly session on different topics on consumer engagement. So I usually send random emails to people to present their topics, and it's a good experience as well to reach out people who are within our state and nationally doing consumer engagement work, but not showcasing them. So I try to showcase their work and also learn from others' work as well. So this session we have fantastic 3 case studies. And I often say diversity is more than skin deep. So diversity is about inclusive of people who are rural and remote regional Australia, who are people like young children, people who are older senior Australians. And that's what we are exactly going to do today in terms of 3 case studies. And the first case study is about partnering with children from Women's and Children's Health Network. So we have 2 speakers. Smith McCue. Diane has a background as a speech pathologist. She is currently the Director of Community Engagement at the Women and Children's Hospital. And we also have Brooke Oliver, Chair of the Women and Children's Hospital Network Youth Advisory Board. So please join me in welcoming Di and Brooke. Thank you.
Thank you, and don't we sound very posh with those titles? But before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that the land that we meet on today is the traditional land of the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual beliefs, and we work with the living Kaurna people today, past, present and emerging leaders. And for NAIDOC Week, I had the pleasure of connecting with Katrina Power, who's also one of our Aboriginal consumers at the Women's and Children's, and the theme was Get Up, Stand Up. And she said, I've been getting up and standing up for everyone over many, many moons. And I think, you know, when we hear the voice of consumers and community, we need to be thinking around that developmental trajectory, that it's not just adults, but actually how do we scaffold and engage and get up and stand up for our children and young people to have their voice heard. So, here at the Women's and Children's, it's not just a nice thing to do, there's actually method in the madness. We're going to actually highlight how we do it because that's what we were asked to present. But I do need to reflect our why we do it, the process and our case study of developing the emergency mental health safety plan with our youth advisory group, and then giving you our hot tips about what's worked, what hasn't worked, and where to from here. So we heard a lot about relationships, and my background as a speechy, but I've also worked in child adolescent mental health. I always say to these psychologists, you can talk about your CBT, your DBT, your ACT, all their special programs, but basically it doesn't mean anything unless you have a therapeutic alliance, which is just the posh word of saying relationship. So 60% of change and engagement is around relationships, and currently we're pulling together the evidence for accreditation, and I think it's really hilarious because everyone's got very posh, reports. I'm screenshotting my texts, messages from the young people to show how we've communicated, where it's happened, how we've developed the relationships, all our little selfies at our meetings, our big like drawings. Do you know what I mean? Like it is a different medium, but it is so rich. So I give you permission. You can look a bit wild and crazy, but they're not going to let you use WhatsApp. I know the young people want me to use WhatsApp and Instagram, but we have a little thing called data sovereignty. Yes, that's a word I have learnt, that we can't be using other mediums. So it is about identifying the scope of what we can do working in a bureaucratic world, but also how we can do it in a relationship way with the young people. So as we say, it's not just a nice thing to do, and it's not just a tick and box, but actually research shows that if you engage your consumers, your community and your young people, knowing that they're the people that are accessing our service at the Women's and Children's Hospital, it results in better patient care, better workforce experience, and actually research shows that when the workforce feels connected with their consumers and community, they're more likely to stay. And we know that people staying in positions is a lot easier than having to go through the continual recruitment cycle. It also results in better clinical care and safety, and you know, they love this, better value for money, because you are targeting and tailoring the research or the service for that consumer and community. So we take the engagement of our consumers and community, including our youth advisory group, very seriously. In the context, we have a very posh document in regard to our strategy and priorities, and number 5 is around governments, systems and processes. So we've talked about a register. Yes, we have a register and we have a database. And so Leukemia Man, if you want a good database, the Better Impact database is fantastic in, yes, you jot that down, in being able to register who has done what. So our consumer advocates, they go through onboarding with me. Yes, they meet me for the first time, aren't they lucky? They have to get their COVID vaccinations, they've got to do mandatory training, they have working with children's checks. We go through quite a rigorous process to be able to capacity build our consumers, including our young people, to be able to engage and have meaningful relationships. Have I buggered up that microphone holding on to it? So we also have a governance structure where we have people not only being able to connect with researchers. Just last night I had a researcher reach out. We're doing a study around long COVID in kids. Would you have some people? And I was like, mate, I got 90 on this register and I know another number of them are having very big feelings about long COVID. So absolutely. So we look at the expression of interest process where we send it out to our consumer advocates, and then I have the joy of nudging. Because, you know, everyone's very nice. Oh, no, you do it. Oh, no, you do it. Oh, no, you need to do it because you have the right lived experience and skills. But we also have, as we'll talk about in a minute, the Youth Advisory Group, but we also have our called round table, which Mario is part of. Oh, I'm going to share the love today. Absolutely. But we also have a number of groups that like are specialist groups that people can access and engage with when they're wanting to do research or learn about how they can co-design service delivery and modelling into the future with that specific group. So IAP2 model, I saw lots of people put up their hand. This is the Women's and Children's unpacking it from our context. So we have opportunities for consumers to inform us about their experience and we inform them about our services. We have opportunities where we ask, and sometimes we have one-off people come and talk to us in the youth advisory group. For example, they did a beautiful fact sheet about how to engage a GP for young people. Yeah, young people don't look at fact sheets, hot tip. So we had an opportunity to connect with them. But what we're going to be talking about today with our case study is very much how we were involved and partnered with child adolescent mental health services in the development of their emergency mental health safety plan. So the IAP2 model is supported by our Better Together approach, which is supported by our SA Health Government. And if you haven't got these docs, I encourage you to go check it out because it's a really good, easy read how-to guide in regard to how to co-design. And it looks at it from a developmental perspective. But there are a number of key principles. So I suppose when we started the emergency safety planning journey, Brooke, do you want to talk about the first meeting we had with these beloved people, with the Youth Advisory Group?
The first meeting was like, they were yarning about like a lot of things and the kids didn't understand it and it was very clunky and they didn't like the app. They didn't like anything that these people came to present about. So, and they didn't understand it. It was all in very big doctor form words and, you know, it wasn't on their level. And I think as well, like with our young group as well, we got a lot of Aboriginal people as well. So we got 50% Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander in our group, and I'm a Kaurna woman myself. So when it comes to it all, I think you need to, rein it into those simple terms and language and stuff like that on their level. But yeah, it was a shit show, to be quite honest. We was all looking at Di, like what the hell is happening? What are these people saying? And then Di came back after when they left was like, I don't even know what they were saying. So at the end of the day, we went and had a meeting with these big dogs and had a yarn with what was going on, like how to present to these kids and in the right way. And they came back couple months later, and it was phenomenal. Like, they actually got a lot of information out of these kids, and they started co-designing, and it was what mattered to them. And I think that's one of the most important things when it comes to working with young people, especially yeah, they're the next generation, bro. Like, you need to understand that much. These are the people that are going to be in the hospital for longer than you fellas are around, you know, and their kids and all of that stuff. So I think it was that was a really penny dropping moment for the kids as well, for them to understand the fact that, like, they listened and they heard and they did. It's in a big institution and all of this stuff, like, kids' voices aren't highlighted, you know, and I think that was the main thing that penny dropped with them. You know, the onboarding process and all of that stuff takes a long time, and especially with kids, like, it's hard work. Like, I want it done now and already done, but like at their pace, you know, it's always at their pace and their level. So getting these people back into the meeting to be able to have a big yarn and on their level, which was like phenomenal. I think they all went back to all their like bosses and stuff and was like, these young people are great, you know, and they implemented all of these things. And I think that was the biggest thing to watch. Like, 3 of these kids, like, we're like, what the heck? Like, you actually listened, you know? Is that it?
Yeah.
Go on.
Well, they saw that we were genuine. That, you know, if you say it, we will embed it. And Charlene, who is in the middle of that picture, she was like, oh my God, you actually listened. And that in a way was her, I'm getting on this bus, I'm getting on this train, and I want to ensure that our health services are better for not only now, but for the next generation. So we developed a safety planning app where all their feedback was embedded. I do love it that they did say the corporate branding, I don't know if you've seen it for Women's and Children's, it looks like an Optus advert.
It does.
But we explained to them that couldn't change, and that's where I was talking before about that scope of influence. Do you know, I think being very clear with young people, the scope is really important, or they will go a bit wild and crazy on you, and then they will not feel heard or listened to. And so now, through the development of that paper-based safety planning app, we're working with Harrison Riddell Institute in developing the Your Crew app. So the experiences of the young people through the safety planning hard copy is now being embedded into their app. And so this is where, you know, they too are having that experience of feeling genuinely heard. So at the moment, when you use this app, you get a very bland emoji. Avatar, sorry. Oh, look at me using the wrong language. Oh, you're going to be able to customise your avatar so it's looking just like you. So, do you know, I think that was really important. But they also talked about, well, what about when there's bullying and harassment on the app? How's that followed up? How's that followed through? How do you train the educators to be able to support young people to engage in this app? And so what these young people are now doing, they're going to that next step. They are youth as researchers. So when they come to the table, Laura is not talking as Laura. Laura is talking as the 400 students at St Mary's that she has spoken to, that she's coming to the meeting and giving the word on the street from that perspective. So that's where I think that next step is, that when you use young people, you say, and we heard from the Canadian, how can you get the broader word on the street? Use them as researchers. Oh, they're the ones. We've got one beautiful consumer who's on a WhatsApp group. Don't tell my boss because he doesn't like WhatsApp. But when I pose a question, he just WhatsApp his 300 called community connections, and then he brings all that information to the table because they're your researchers. So you don't have to have a huge register. It's about capacity building those on the register to reach out to their community. One of our youth advisory group, little Zach, he lives in Coffin Bay. We love Zach. And he's reaching out to all his regional connections. So we don't have regional people from everywhere, but Zach knows the word on the street of what's happening in that quite remote community up in the Eyre Peninsula. So this is a little table of our best ofs about what's worked, what hasn't worked, and what's definitely not a tick and flick. So there is the need for it to be a continuum of opportunities for young people. It's never too early to engage. Is there anything you want to...
what has... No. What was within...
I think for me, the timeframes need to be realistic. How many times have you got the email on a Friday afternoon, right, we want young people to have an opinion on this? Well, that's a tick and flick. That ain't going to happen on a Friday afternoon.
I think it's like embedding them in the whole process, and I think that's the thing, like from the ground up. I think that's one thing that needs to be happen, like with this CAM's mental health plan and all of that stuff. Like they started from the ground up when they were designing it, and like we could have input in what actually matters and what is written in it, the questions, the way that it looks, the way that it feels, the way that it's presented, because these people are the ones that are actually getting the information, you know, with the fact sheets and stuff like that, and with raised stuff with knowing your rights, you know, we're embedding that to child safe words and like a child, like, I don't know, like youth-friendly words, and it's on a different level. And I think when it's the tick and flick stuff, it needs to be embedded from the ground up. Otherwise, you're not working with, or you're just literally using, you know. And I think that's the thing with us and the young people. Like we work really well in engaging that, and it's from, like, we didn't even know what this youth advisory group would look like, to be honest. Di posed the idea to me, and it was all on MS Teams, and I said, get wrecked. I'm not doing it on Teams. We need to meet in person. We need to do it, like, because the COVID jabs and all of that stuff was clunky. I was like, we can meet in the grasslands or like somewhere else, like outside of the hospital, so it doesn't need to be that approach. And like I think that's worked really well, like, and like Di respected that. She like worked with me and the kids to like make sure that it was like face to face, and it was enriching, and getting these people that come along and get the familiar faces like Tim and Tom from CAMS and stuff like that, and watching this stuff actually come to life with the kids. And they're the biggest supporters, you know, the people that are actually getting the information from us, because these kids are experts of their own lives. They're experts of what's happening on the street. They know what's up in their healthcare rights. They may not know how to execute it, but that's our job to teach them that, you know. And I think that's one thing that's really important. Yeah.
So we have a little motto. You said we heard, we did. And so the next steps of the safety planning process is that in January, we're going to support our young people to hold consultations with other young people that have used the emergency safety planning sheet, to be able to find out from them what's worked, what hasn't worked, what needs to make it better. And then we can also feed back to them how their information has been used. Because to me, it is a real privilege that for these young people, this is their first experience of being heard, listened to, involved in as global citizens. We want to encourage and engage. And so for me, it's a huge level of responsibility to ensure that it's done with authenticity. And I think that's something I was really keen for you guys to take away with today. Questions and comments? We're done.
Smashed it, mate.
20 minutes. Aren't you proud of us? On the dot.
Any questions? We might have
Thank you for that. That was really great. Just with the age span of young people involved, obviously there's a limit of understanding. How do you engage with the younger ones, like, you know, say, I don't know, 5 to 10 as opposed to 13 to 16? What's the capacity there?
So our youth advisory group is 12 to 25 because that's what young people are defined as here in South Australia. Historically, the Women's and Children's had a kids club. And so longer term, our goal is that our youth advisory group will be mentors and peer supports for the younger age group, so we can then capacity build them. Currently, we're involved in a study with the Centre Australian Health Council of Australia with the Starlight Foundation, looking at a child PREM tool, a patient risk supporting experience measure for 6 to 16-year-olds, and that has been quite a journey through ethics, but we have got there. However, for me, it is very much making it experiential. So they've got their own lived experiences and letting them tell the story. So very quickly, I know I've got to go. When I first started this journey, the 3rd National Mental Health Plan came out. We're now up to the 5th. So there's a few moons ago. And I read it and I went, gee, I don't think like this is what young people are thinking, but you know, what would I know? So I told my boss at the time, and he went, that's a good idea, Di. So we got together all these young people, and they were like between 8 and 18, because that was the mental health service I was running. And these very posh people from Canberra came down. And it was like they sat at one end, the young people sat at the other end, and I put pizza and Coke in the middle and hoped for the best. Yet didn't go that well in that sense. So, you know, with some very like inappropriate questions, and you saw the young people going like this, and the 8-year-old just wanted the pizza. I've realised that it is very much around, like we heard before, people telling their stories, and then we having to draw out the themes from that, and then checking in with them with the you said, we heard, we did, that we got the right themes as to how we embed it. So it's very much we have to scaffold the opportunities that they can use their lived experience and their stories. Brooke?
I just think provide a safe space, they'll come, you know, and people always want to talk, and I think that's the Nunga in me as well, you know, like you provide a safe space, people will share their expressions, you know, and their feelings and their emotions. It's not a therapeutic group, but as a therapeutic value. When you get validated and heard for the first time, it's a very restorative justice kind of thing, you know, and that changes and shifts your mentality on towards like any institution, you know. Yeah, I think with the young followers as well, it's just making sure that you're mindful of language and keeping that in account of it all. Providing food, as Di said, that always works. These followers like to eat. And yeah, it's literally just me and Di nut out an agenda in like 15 minutes in a phone call, and just making sure that it is very child friendly. You know, you need to make sure that it is accessible to all. And I think being Ghana as well, so like half my language is not English anyway. So, you know, I've got that in the forefront of my mind. I tell Di all the time, what the hell are you saying, bro? If I don't get it, they're not going to get it, you know? So there's accountability in both parts. Yeah. Is that all? Can we go?
Thanks, Brooke and Di. That was fantastic, and a lot of energy from young people. That's good. And our next session is on partnering with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. We have two fantastic speakers. Associate Professor Odette Pearson. She's a Kukuya LNG Torres Strait Islander woman jointly appointed as the co-team leader with Kim within the Aboriginal Health Equities Research and Strategy Group at SAHMRI and the Sansom Institute for Health Research within University of South Australia. With strong community and cross-sector engagement, her current research activities focus on how to reduce disadvantage by improving health and social system responses to better meet the needs of Aboriginal people. Kim Morey. Kim is the co-team leader, Aboriginal Health Equity and Strategy. She has over 25 years of experience in Aboriginal health and community services. Kim's family connections are to Central Australia. She is of Amajira, Eastern Aranda descent. She has extensive knowledges of public sector system, policy development, strategic advice, and monitoring. She also has a strong working relationship across government and non-government sectors within Aboriginal community leaders. Please join me in welcoming Kim and Odette. Thank you.
Thanks very much. You have to be careful what's on the internet these days. Look, thanks so much for inviting us here to have a bit of a conversation about community engagement and consumer engagement with regards to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health and with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Oh, yeah. There we go. Thank you. So Kim's going to let me speak today, but I think there'll be things that Kim would like to add. So firstly, I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're on the lands of the Kaurna people. Uncle Lewis O'Brien would tell us a story about this actual site here, being the location that SAHMRI is built on was actually a meeting place over tens of thousands of years, and really important business happened here, not just for the Kaurna, but the Kaurna are hosted many language groups here. And so really that's what the essence of this building is. We do important work and we make important decisions, but we hope that we make those decisions in partnership with the people that we're actually serving or working for to improve health equity. We were gifted our name, Wardliparingga. Wadley, and we were gifted that from Kaurna people, the Kaurna language group. Wadley meaning house or hut, and Paringga meaning river. So we know the beautiful Torres is here, and this is our house or hut. I think the story for our consumer and community engagement really starts from the very beginning of SAHMRI. So we know that Aboriginal health was one of the themes within SAHMRI since its inception. Typically in a research institute, Aboriginal health, or within even universities, is a tag-on or part of another theme or area. However, the founders and the developers of SAHMRI really wanted Aboriginal health to be one of the core themes, and that has remained for the last 12 years. And so from the very beginning, Kim, Alex were very, they made sure that the community actually defined and were part of this building and the space and the research that we do. This is the opening day of SAHMRI, and you can see in the front row we have a lot of Aboriginal elders that were invited to the opening, and some of those elders are no longer here with us today, but they were really instrumental in the theme and the research and the programs of research that we actually continue to work on today. And remembering this was in 2012, so research hasn't had a good legacy with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and so when we started, this is a research institute, it's not a university, we can't dress this up as anything but research. And so we really needed to create relationships and partnerships with community. We needed to have conversations, deep, meaningful, honest conversations about research, and actually understand from the community's perspective how we can actually do research that is of benefit to them. And all of this was part of the process, part of being able to do that. We had a governance structure in the early days, which was made up of members of the Council of Aboriginal Elders in South Australia, and they really helped us to work out, well, how are we going to do this engagement? How are we going to, partner with communities? Where do we start? Who are the right people that we need to start talking with? What are the processes that we need to undertake? I think Di and Brooke talked about safe spaces. So it was really important that SAHMRI was a safe space for the Aboriginal community to be able to come and be part of what we're doing here and to actually direct what we're doing here. The building was smoked. This is Kim and Alex with, is that Carl? And yeah, they smoked the building. Kim's got a great story about the fact that the fire alarms had to be turned off for 24 hours over a weekend. Was it? But even just explaining to the fire brigade, it's a smoking ceremony. They didn't know what that was. You know, we're not lighting the we're not actually creating a fire, and so that was a big conversation. But the actual ashes from the smoking ceremony are buried here. So this is actually a safe space. This building has been smoked, and we have the ashes, and that's really important because we are here today, but we are not going to be here always. And so those ashes will always be here. The building will have always been smoked. So we needed to understand, you know, what were the community's guidelines for us. Like, you know, there's no exceptions. These are the principles by which research needs to be done here in South Australia from this day forward. So the first thing we did was to develop, one of the first things we did was to ask communities, ask Aboriginal people, ask Aboriginal organisations, you know, how can we do research the right way? What are the things that we have to do that are non-negotiable? And so all of our research endeavours to incorporate principles of doing research the right way, and these are the principles. Typically research was investigator-led, so people were curious about us, they were curious about something, a condition that we may have had, or the way we did things, or the way we looked, and so that is you know, no longer acceptable. And so by priority, it is actually a community identified priority. So communities and they've actually started coming to us now, either individuals or community organisations or community groups, and asking us to do research on certain questions or topics that are important to them and important to their community. In the beginning, we had broad consultations around, you know, what are the priorities, and so those are the priorities that informed our work. Involvement, partnership, respect, communication, reciprocity. I think, you know, as consumers and community engagers, you understand what those words are and what they mean. Ownership and control, these talk to self-determination for Aboriginal communities. Owning the research, controlling the research, that goes back to co-design. It goes back to the power imbalance that happens between researchers and community, and trying to change that power dynamic. And of course translation, because we very rarely benefited from the research that was done on us. And so defining what that benefit is, for then us to be able to advocate or you know, develop the findings of the research for translation. So in each of our research projects, we endeavour to implement these principles, and they all look different across different projects, and that depends on a lot of different things. And we're learning, like we've grown, we've developed, the community has definitely become more sophisticated in their relationship with research and their relationship with us. And that's the great thing about principles. Through this project, when I talked about, you know, we went to communities and consulted across South Australia about what keeps them up at night, what worries them, you know, what are their priorities, what supports their well-being. And so the Next Steps project back in 2014 was really where we had all of that information to inform the program of work that we do. And so these were the areas at the time. And so obviously chronic disease, population health with a big focus on data. So there was data sovereignty mentioned. This was really about Indigenous data sovereignty and Aboriginal people, Aboriginal communities actually wanting their own health data about their own communities rather than the statewide profile. Health systems research, so influencing systems, implementing the research findings, evaluating that, and adolescent health also came through, which was more of a recent emerging priority from the community. So most of our, if not all of our work really involves community in some way. So in our individual research projects, we'll have either community advisory groups, or we might have, and those advisory groups, the makeup of those would depend on the work that's been done or the question that's being asked. So they may be, for example, service providers, or they may be policymakers, they may be people with lived experience, they may be a mix of all of those, they may be different ages, different gender, depending on if it's a men's health project, which we do, as well as women's health. So really we think really hard about you know, what is the makeup of the consumer and the community that need to guide the research, and we don't finalise that, we finalise it with the consumers and the community, so that it will often change. We just sort of start the process and then it will merge and develop over time. I think one of the things that we would really like to do going into the future is how does community evaluate our impact? So we are really, you know, here to close the gap. You've probably heard that saying, in inequities between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. And, you know, we do partner with Aboriginal people and communities, and we do that across South Australia, we do it across Australia, and we can measure our impact in different ways, through data, for example, but really we're now moving into the stage of, well, we want to hear from people about what they think our impact is. We want them to evaluate our impact. We want to be accountable to the community, even though we have, you know, governance groups and advisory groups. It's like, are we really accountable? So we're searching for that next level of accountability. I think I was talking to someone here, like, as individuals we're accountable because we walk down the road and we see Auntie and they say, look, this hasn't happened properly, or we need this to happen, or do it this way. And that's like, okay, you know, if we don't hear anything bad, we're doing a good thing. But broadly speaking, how are we actually accountable? How can we be, as a research group, accountable to the community in you know, what we're aiming to actually deliver? So that's, for Kim and I, one of our next big sort of aims over the next couple of 18 months or so for the theme. And, you know, the advisory groups all vary as well. So working with Gillian, looking at a national registry. So there's an amazing registry of senior Australians here that holds a lot of rich information on older people or people in aged care. And so we've established a national reference group for that, a national advisory committee, and one of the first things we did after developing the terms of reference with the committee was to develop a living question framework, because the data had never been asked questions of by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So the registry had never been used for our purpose, for our benefit. And so we, as a committee, we developed, a national committee, we developed this living question framework. And that living question framework, then 3 of those questions informed a grant that we were successful in, and now we're generating evidence for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community that has never been generated before, to be able to inform change. So that's just one example. Going to the youth, absolutely, you know, loved your presentation and your work. So important. We have probably older Aboriginal people, so the good news is we are living longer. It means that we're going to have greater demand for aged care, and it also means that we don't really know much about our older population. We also have the stolen generation who will be all turning or who will all be eligible for aged care in a year's time, and we don't know very much about the stolen generation at all. So we have, and then the other population we don't know much about is our adolescents, is our young people. We know things about mothers and babies, we know things about adults, but it's really those two population groups, three, including the stolen generation. And so these are most important to ensure we're working with, you know, the actual people with lived experience, or the population group themselves. This grant was actually, it's an MRFF grant, and the chief investigators on the grant include younger people that don't have a research track record. So Seth is actually CIB on this grant, and he then developed or established a national advisory group of young people, and the purpose of this study is to develop a national Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander roadmap, adolescent roadmap. And so we, as investigators, were like, oh, you know, let's do this, let's do that. And actually it became really obvious very quickly. Hey, dude, you know, move over, step aside, and they're just running it. They're running with it, they're doing it. At the same time, so they are actually defining the way in which the roadmap will be developed. They're defining the questions that need to be asked. They're defining the communication that's happening across Australia with younger people. They've developed the website. They're going to be analysing the data. There's very little we're going to do, but what we actually had to really do was to ensure that they had what they needed to be able to do what they wanted to do. And so there was a whole bucket of money that we just channeled into, you know, developing them up to be able to achieve what they wanted to achieve through this roadmap. And they can decide whether, you know, that's a formal course or whether it's coaching, whether it's mentoring, whether it's, and yeah, so that's something, that's a space that was sort of, I guess, new for us on a national level, but it's been really amazing and I've really learned a lot. And that's it. Thank you.
Hi, I really like the flipping the question on its head and going, how does the community evaluate our research as opposed to us using the metrics that we're used to in the health domain? So if we happen to get really positive assessments of health translation, but the community doesn't value that we've done enough or that it's actually positive, what do you do in that scenario? Or are we looking at the wrong thing from the beginning?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. I mean, I think one of the things we've sort of talked about is taking the principle approach. So there's always going to be ways we could have done things differently. If that's consistently the message, then yeah, we really need to change things. I think that when we measure impact from a research point of view or from a health service or health system point of view, those indicators, I think, are going to be very different to the way community measures impact. So, for example, even in the health service, so this is one of the things that's come through in some of the research is when people walk into a health service, they want to see a black fella. You know, they want to see people like them, I guess. It's the same with research. When we're doing research, they want to see us in research. So would an indicator be something along the lines of that? You know, that's just one example of a potential indicator. The other ways in which, in which they will measure it, we really, I mean, Kim, you might have some insight.
I mean, we've asked that question through in the work that I do in chronic disease, and it's definitely been around workforce, you know, things like access to traditional healing, you know, culturally responsive services. These are the things that we are interested in, and we've got a long way to go to be able to provide those services in a way that are appropriate to community. So then it's around how do we, you know, what are some of the things that can influence systems, so that it's that education, you know, educating and next generation of our workforce, but mainstream workforce. So these are the types of things that community have talked about in the chronic disease kind of area, as well as, you know, health literacy and really improving from a community, you know, up approach around the messaging around, you know, what the protective factors are, including connection and culture and Aboriginal elements of wellbeing. So that holistic approach rather than the biomedical kind of lens of risk factors are some of the things that community, you know, strongly suggested to us as ways to, you know,
So the strengths-based narratives, but I think one of the things that we are consciously trying not to do is to try and preempt these sorts of things. Like, so we would usually start with a blank slate. If we ever did sort of search literature, because we often look for, you know, examples across New Zealand, Canada, we would keep that literature separate to the conversations, and then in the actual methodology, we'd start to, you know, synthesise those things. I think the principles coming from community might be an area where they could start to look at, you know, do they want to measure our impact against the principles? But there are going to be things that we don't actually know, which I think is great. And one of the things that we're doing, so we have about 17 advisory groups across our projects, and we, I spoke about at the beginning, we had the Council of Elders. So over time, the Council of Elders haven't continued to be part of the governance structure of our theme, and so we're actually revisiting that to have, you know, an overarching governance structure, and that will, I think, help us to start to define, or, you know, through their processes, to define what impact might be. Thank you.
Thanks, Odette and Kim. I'm sorry, we are just a bit of overtime, but we have to give Gillian enough time to present her topic as well. So please excuse me if we went over time for lunch. And the next speaker is Associate Professor Gillian Caughey. She is a research fellow at the Principal Research Fellow at the Registry of Senior Australians at SAHMRI, and an adjunct professor, associate professor at UniSA. And her work has internationally recognized, focused on medicine safety and utilization in older people with multimorbidity and polypharmacy. Please join me in welcoming Gillian.
So thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. And first I'd like to acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of the Adelaide region, and where we meet today. And we recognise the Kaurna people's cultural, spiritual, physical and emotional connection with the land. And we honour and pay respects to Kaurna elders, both past, present and all generations of Kaurna people, and now and into the future. So I'm coming at a different angle. So we're talking about older people and how we at the Registry of Senior Australians really have older people embedded within our research. So just a little bit of background about who we are. We're a clinical quality registry. that's designed to monitor and evaluate health service use, medication use, mortality, and other really important key outcomes of people receiving aged care services in Australia. And we have the overall aim to improve the quality of ageing. What we importantly do is link data from aged care and health data to provide a complete picture of the ageing journey from someone when they enter the aged care system. And I think one of the reasons why ROSA has been so successful to date, we were only established in 2017, is that we were supported by a partnership, and it was a partnership of 12 different research groups, clinicians, aged care providers, consumer advocacy organisations. And so it really wasn't your traditional, this is what we're going to do our research, but it was a partnership of those end users that are really important in translation for our research, and importantly, the consumers there as well, that, this is why we're doing the research, and this is why we want to improve the health and wellbeing and their outcomes. So I think, Odette spoke about the sort of foundation and underlying principles. I think this has been a really strength that consumers have been embedded in our journey since 2017. And here we are today. There's a team of 21 of us now, and we have a whole range of multidisciplinary team, ranging from computer scientists, pharmacoepidemiologists, et cetera, et cetera. So this, we don't need to spend too much time on that, but I just wanted to show that what we actually do is we have the aged care data, so anyone that's ever received an aged care service or has been assessed for an aged care service in Australia is the backbone essentially of our registry, and then we link that to all health data, and this includes medication data, health service utilisation data and hospitalisation data, so we can really understand the patient's journey from that entry into the aged care system over time. We've got two cohorts. We've got a historical one, so that's where we've done most of our research today, where we have over 3.5 million people ever accessed aged care in Australia, and it's been an amazing, powerful resource to be able to do a lot of the work that we've done. Importantly, again, back to those foundations and how we're set up. So ROSA has a strong governance committee, and it really is driven by these governance to embed in our research and our research priorities and our research translation. So we have our SAHMRI and health translation as sort of like a core oversight. But we have a steering committee which has 16 people. It's all determined on skills based. And importantly, as you can see in there highlighted in bold, is that consumers are actually part of our ROSA steering committee. Importantly, we also have our ROSA Consumer and Community Advisory Committee, and I can see Mario here today. I'm going to point him out again. He's getting some special mentions as he's one of our members, and we meet twice a year. And there's a whole range of skills from those people that are involved in our consumer committee. And as Odette said, we also have our ROSA Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Advisory Committee that's led by Odette, enabled the research to be led by Aboriginal people for Aboriginal people. And as Odette mentioned, that they have generated the living framework. So it's the research questions that are of importance to them that we are doing, rather than us sitting in our ivory tower saying this is what's really important. So this research, importantly, is driven by Aboriginal people. So I just wanted to highlight some of our achievements to date. As I say, we've only been established since 2017, and I really think that this success has been because of this co-design and partnership that we have with our end users, which includes aged care providers, which includes government, state government, and also importantly the consumers. This is who we're doing the research with and for. And importantly, you can see there, it looks great. We have publications, reports, and one of the most amazing things that we have been able to contribute to is the Royal Commission into aged care quality and safety. Our registry was quite timely set up just prior to this being announced, so we were the evidence source go-to. So that has been an amazing opportunity, if you like, to actually then embed this evidence both now into policy and practice moving forward. But as I said, you know, we have that really strong community engagement that is embedded within what we do. Here's a little picture of us, looking good there, Mario, of our Consumer and Community Advisory Committee. And so we meet twice a year, and then we also have ad hoc membership. And really, you know, we really are very passionate about our consumer committee. It's not just we have a meeting and it's token and we tick the box. They are embedded in our research, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we have embedded across the whole research cycle, if you like, our consumers. So as I said, we've got this multi-pronged approach across the whole facet. It's not just we have a committee meeting, tick, we're done. It's like they're really engaged. They, you know, across the whole life cycle. And through that, with having those sort of, like Odette mentioned about the principles, we have our consumer engagement strategy that really is our framework to drive how to do, you know, purposeful and meaningful consumer engagement. And importantly, we had one from the previous 4 years. So it really is a living document. We're learning how to do this better. And we really want to share what we do, what we know, what works, what doesn't work in terms of this kind of engagement. And you can read there about our vision. You know, ROSA, our vision is to conduct high quality research to improve the health and wellbeing of all Australians accessing aged care services through a collaborative, meaningful and respectful partnership with both consumers and community members, researchers, clinicians, aged care providers and advisory bodies and policy makers, importantly. And we built our consumer and community engagement strategy using SAHMRI's framework for consumer engagement. So we had the bones there to start with, and that was a really amazing foundation from which we then did our building blocks, if you like, for ROSA moving forward. Importantly, moving forward, I think it's important that we highlight, you know, some of those definitions. So we talk about our consumer committee, our community committee. What does it actually mean to be part of our committee? And it really is people that have a lived experience of the aged care system, either through direct involvement and or caring for others accessing aged care services. And it can also importantly include people who want to represent the views and perspectives from a consumer organisation or community. And this is through a lot of our work we've done with CODA SA. We really have that wider older person's voice through our consumer committee. And we see our consumer engagement is active and meaningful involvement in the research process. And we're going back here to that word relationship and how important it is to have that relationship between consumers and researchers, and the active involvement of consumers in our research priority setting, question development, the methods, how are we going to do this? What is it important? How do we interpret these results? You know, what does it actually mean from a consumer perspective about these findings? And importantly, the next step then is research translation and communication. So this is our little cycle, if you like, our multifaceted pronged approach we have to our consumer engagement. And as you can see, it's a continuous loop. So it's not just you do this, but it's always continually evolving. And it really does go across the whole research life cycle. I've spoken a little bit about the research governance and oversight. We have our committee helping us to determine, as Odette highlighted as well, what's important to them. There's no point us sitting here thinking of all these great questions if it doesn't actually mean anything, or it's the things that are important to older people that are accessing aged care services. They go towards the development of the research questions. And in doing that, as an example, we've also had some of our consumers actually be investigators, co-investigators on a couple of our grants moving forward. So I'll highlight that as well. And one of the really most wonderful things that we've been doing over the last 18 months is that we've been mentoring our PhD students and our early career researchers with a consumer member from our committee. They meet just ad hoc every now and then. They meet in the cafe and they have a chat, and they just talk about their lived experiences and how potentially that might relate to the research findings that us researchers are doing. And all the feedback that I've had from the students and our early career researchers is that it's just a really wonderful opportunity to engage and listen and hear. And, you know, we have lovely feedback as well from our consumer members about, you know, just having that opportunity, just to have that one-on-one time with the people that are, you know, the next generation of researchers. It's, you know, the young people are the future, we're the old ones, we're on our way out. So, you know, we need to train up the younger researchers to do this properly. And then importantly about interpretation of research findings, dissemination and communication and translation importantly. So this is one of what I was mentioning about previously with our PhD student mentoring and with our early career researchers. And again, here's an example of a couple of grants that we've got recently where we actually had a consumer as an associate investigator. And I think the first time we did this, we contacted the research officer and they were like, oh, you don't know how to do this. Do they have a, you know, grant number? Do they have a grant ID? So, you know, it was just, it seemed like a very simple gesture to us, and it was reflective of our belief of collaboration. You know, it hadn't been done before in SAHMRI. So I think, you know, it's just those little baby steps in progressing and moving things forward and having that real, you know, partnership relationship with our consumers. One of the things we've been hearing about is, you know, about how to convey the right message, how to communicate for the right audience. And so unlike young people, older people, they don't use Twitter, they rarely use the internet, they don't know Instaface, anything like that. So, so we reached out to CODA SA to try and understand what it is that older people and how they access their information about aged care, about healthcare, and all that research that's generated. How do they actually learn about it? And it was really interesting. I mean, and it was, you know, very insightful for, you know, we need to target this as our communication strategy. So it was more about conventional media, about TV, newspapers, magazines. They also said, you know, they have that sort of more old school trust in their doctor, like the doctor told me to take this medicine, so I just take it without that question being asked. Unlike the younger generation that'll be like, well, I'm not doing that, you need to give me a reason, you know, like, so they were just that generation that's more like, yes, so the doctor's office is somewhere that they feel safe, and if we can convey some of our research at that spot there through simple infographics, then, you know, that's an opportunity as well. So we learned from this plug-in collaboration with the CODA about developing our communication framework that was targeted for our research and our research outputs. And this is just an example of one of our infographics, we're calling them. So we have our outputs of a, you know, 12-page, you know, publication or manuscript. No one's going to read that, but here we are trying to just convey it in more simple language in terms of the key research findings and what are the take-home messages and what is it sort of like, so what does this study add? So, you know, so what kind of thing and how this can make a difference. So we've started doing this now for all of our research outputs, and we send it out to our consumers to get their feedback. So we're actually using the right language as well, which is really important in terms of sort of understanding and just making sure that it's appropriate, you know, for the older people to read. So just that's another couple of examples of where we sort of, you know, that whole cycle of research that we do. So, you know, I think from our perspective, we've been really successful academically, but importantly, having that ability to influence practice and influence policy change has really stemmed from having that really strong and true relationships and collaboration with consumers and our end users. So, you know, we really believe that it does enhance the quality of our research, and those unique and lived experiences have so much to offer in terms of us understanding our data. We do studies on, you know, 100,000 people, but having that real perspective really adds value to it. So I think I'll just, you know, I'll leave it there in the interest of time. And if you've got any questions or comments, feel free to just send me an email or reach out, and thanks for your time. lunchtime.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We will reconvene here at 12:45 for our panel discussion that will be on the topic of connecting with diverse communities. We have three fantastic panelists, and please join me in thanking the speakers for this session. Thank you.